If you're taking a benzo like Xanax or Klonopin, or thinking about taking one, it is important to understand the risks right away so you can make an informed decision. Trust me, taking a benzo is a serious decision, and you should be fully aware of what you're getting into before taking the drug. And so today, we're going to be discussing the top 10 reasons my patients regretted taking benzodiazepines. And for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Josef, board-certified psychiatrist, former FDA medical officer, and expert in helping people taper off benzodiazepine medications. I've helped hundreds of people come off benzos, and I even used to take Xanax myself, so I know this from both sides. So let's jump in. So the first reason is you can get trapped on them due to dependence. When you take drugs like Xanax, your brain adapts to the drug, and over time it starts to fight against the effects of the medication, causing the benefits to wear off. Once this happens, you can't simply stop taking Xanax because your brain has now become dependent on it. And so if you stop it too quickly, you'll experience withdrawal symptoms like anxiety, insomnia, or even physical discomfort like muscle pains and tensions. And for many people, this creates a trap for them where they're stuck on the medications and they're unable to quit because to do so, they would go through withdrawal. And you end up in a situation where now you have your original problems, the anxiety and the insomnia, but on top of that, now you're dealing with the withdrawal from the drug. And so it can become very difficult to stop these medications once you start them. Reason number 2, tolerance. So many people find that after they start taking drugs like Xanax, they wear off and they don't work as well as they used to. Typically, the hypnotic effects, the effects to help you sleep, sometimes they wear off pretty quickly. I've seen it happen in a couple weeks sometimes. And then the anxiety reducing effects, sometimes I see that go away after a couple of months. And so what that means is you end up taking a drug that becomes less and less effective over time. And so you end up in a situation where you either keep on taking a drug that's not really doing much, or you have to increase the dose. And so many people end up, again, in another kind of trap where the drug will work for a period of time, and then they have to raise the dose, and then they have to raise the dose again. Eventually, these patients end up on really high doses of this medication, and their life becomes a lot more complicated after that. It can be hard to get doctors to fill them, but also you can have a lot of side effects on the higher doses. The next reason people regret taking these medications is that they can actually increase anxiety in some people over time. Now, I've seen this happen in a couple of ways. One way is through a process called interdose withdrawal. Let's say you're taking Xanax twice a day. People may start to notice that after a while, they start to feel more irritable and moody during the day, particularly before their next dose. Essentially, what's happened now is they become dependent to the medication and they're going into periods of withdrawal in between the drug. And you can start to feel like you're less and less in control of your emotions. The other way I've seen these drugs make people worse is simply through direct side effects of them. Now, this is what happened to me when I took Xanax for 5 months. I found that over time, I started to just feel unwell. I started to have all of these obsessive thoughts coming in. And it was only when I started working with a lot of patients coming off benzodiazepines that I realized this was really common. That yes, there are a lot of people who become anxious when they're coming off this medication, particularly with these strange, intrusive, obsessive thoughts that people may never have had. That was the case for me. I've also seen clinical trials where they look at people who were given Xanax and people who were given placebo, and they follow them over time. And they find that at the end of it, some people were actually worse on the Xanax than they were on the placebo, which is really concerning. And so if you're someone who was taking this medication and over time you started becoming anxious in ways you weren't used to, you start feeling unwell, having trouble concentrating, you might be getting worse because of the toxic effects of this medication. The next reason why a lot of people regretted getting on benzos in the first place is because of the stigma associated with it. Ever since the opiate epidemic, where health agencies started focusing a lot more on controlled substances, there has been a shift in the medical community with regards to benzodiazepines. It's quite common nowadays for patients to report feeling stigmatized by their doctors for taking these medications. Namely, they start to assume that they are having addiction problems or that they're addicted to the medication. And so I've had patients tell me that, they lost their medication one time and then they went to speak with their doctor, but their doctor was very nasty to them, kind of assuming maybe they had overused it. The people at the pharmacy were nasty to them in that way as well. These are people who never had a history of abusing the drugs. They were just taking the drugs as prescribed by their doctor. But now all of a sudden, because of the concern about controlled substances, they're being treated in this way, which really isn't fair. Another way patients commonly experience this is when their doctor retires and they go and try and find another doctor. But a lot of doctors will say, we don't prescribe benzodiazepines, or we don't take patients who are taking benzodiazepines. And this can be so frustrating because all of a sudden you're living in this alternate reality where, okay, this was okay for a long period of time, but now everyone's treating me in this very different way. The next reason people regret taking them is because they end up in situations where they get forced tapered off the medications. Now, because of the stigma surrounding these meds, a lot of doctors want to bring their patients off them, which is fair enough. But the issue is the doctors really don't know how to get them off safely. It's very often for doctors to taper patients in maybe 2 to 3 months, if that, or sometimes even go to a detox and you get taken off in 2 weeks. That is dangerous, and that really doesn't work well for everyone. I know there's some people who tolerate that, but a lot of people really don't. And so the situation patients find themselves in often is that their doctors will say, well, I'm no longer comfortable prescribing this medication and you got to be off in 2 months. This is the plan. And if you don't like it, you have to find another doctor. But as I mentioned in the past, that's not really an option because a lot of doctors don't take these benzodiazepine cases, or if they do, they force taper them as well. Unfortunately, the highest risk period for this, from my experience, has been when someone turns age 65. And that's because there's something called the Beers criteria out there. This is a criteria that gives guidelines about the types of medications people should be on and shouldn't be on. And after you turn 65, it says that benzodiazepines are high risk because they're associated with more sedation and falls in the elderly. And so now I work with a lot of patients who are right there on that 65 to 66 age group because their doctors are forced tapering them off the medications and they're really not doing well. Now on to the next reason. So part of the big deal about the forced tapering is that withdrawal symptoms from benzodiazepines can be absolutely brutal. There is no shortage of people out there talking about this online. In fact, some people even say that, some people who have had exposure to multiple drugs will even say coming off Xanax was harder than coming off heroin. And it makes sense because the withdrawal symptoms are nasty. We're talking about increased anxiety, insomnia, muscle tension and tightness. These can be some of the hardest withdrawal symptoms to bear. And to make matters worse, if you're someone who gets abruptly cut off these medications, there's even a risk of death. Out of all of the substances out there, there's only 2 drugs that I know of that cause people to actually die from the withdrawal reaction. That's benzodiazepines and alcohol. And the reason is these medications are depressants. And so if you stop them suddenly, you can end up having a seizure. And if you have a severe enough seizure, it shuts down the parts of your brain that are involved in your cardiac system and your breathing system. And so these people, they essentially die from that dysfunction. However, that typically only happens if you are abruptly cut off. Now, going back to the withdrawal symptoms, a lot of these symptoms can last for many months or longer. In fact, there is a small group of people who, when they come off these medications, they develop a condition called benzodiazepine-induced neurological dysfunction. And this is a form of brain injury where people can have severe symptoms that can go on for years. Now, these people ultimately recover because I work with a lot of them, but it can completely change your life and leave you quite disabled. Unfortunately, a lot of doctors don't recognize bind or protracted withdrawal, which is the other name for it. And so many patients suffer from this condition in silence, not really knowing what's happened to them. Changing gears now to talk about another problem, and that is that traveling with benzodiazepines like Xanax can be a total hassle. I've had patients in the past avoid traveling because traveling with controlled substances can be a risk. Sometimes people go into their bags and they take them. Sometimes people from the hotels will take their medications. And there is nothing worse than being stuck in a different state or even a different country and running out of these medications because it's not like you can get them mailed to you. And you need them. If you don't take them, very quickly your entire vacation is derailed because you're in severe withdrawal. And so you end up in this situation where you're going to emergency rooms, you're talking to doctors in different languages. And again, because of the stigma of this, they probably end up treating you like a drug addict, quite unfairly so. So traveling with these medications just ends up introducing another headache and a hassle, and people hate that. The next reason why a lot of my patients have regretted taking drugs like Xanax is that it's destroyed their memory. A lot of people who take this medication will report that they don't consolidate their memories in the right way, and so they feel like they can't remember large portions of their life. I've had people tell me that they struggle to remember raising their children, having cherished memories with their parents, or going on wonderful trips with their spouse. And I hear this again and again. And in fact, these memory problems can be so pervasive that there's actually a lot of concern out there about benzodiazepines potentially causing Alzheimer's disease. So I'd highly recommend for anyone who's worried about cognitive decline, or if they're already struggling with memories, to be really cautious about taking benzos. So reason number 9, drug interactions. Taking drugs like Xanax can make it really hard to get other important medications if you need them, particularly pain meds. Now, if you're in a serious accident and you need to get opiates afterwards because you're having severe pain, if you're taking benzodiazepines, it's very likely your doctors are going to force taper you off the benzo, or they're not going to give you the opiate. And that's because of the black boxed warning on these medications. And so if you're not aware, there's a boxed warning that says if you give opiates and benzodiazepines together, it increases the risk of respiratory depression, which means people essentially stop breathing. And so because of this warning, it's really hard to get these meds prescribed at the same time. In addition to that, drugs like Xanax can also make you more sensitive to other sedative medications, or even things like alcohol. So if you start stacking these on top of each other, all of a sudden you have a lot of dizziness, you're very clumsy, and you're more prone to accidents and falls. And finally, the number 10 reason why people have regretted taking this is that these drugs can be addictive. Now, not for everyone. There's a lot of people who just take them as prescribed, but we have to be honest about this. These drugs are really potent, and when you take them, they can be very calming. And if you have an addictive personality and you're having a lot of anxiety and stress in your life, it can be really easy in getting caught in that trap to using these medications to cover up those feelings. Clearly, addiction is a massive problem. I've seen it wreak havoc on the lives of my patients. I've seen people lose their relationships, lose their jobs, even get into car accidents where they've hurt people and it's completely changed their lives. It's a total tragedy. On top of that, a lot of people who end up with addiction problems, they end up sourcing these drugs from the dark net, from other countries, or on the street. And you simply don't know what's in those drugs. And then you run into issues where you don't know whether you're really getting the drug or whether it's cut with some substance like fentanyl that can be really dangerous. And so there you have it. Those are the top 10 reasons that my patients have regretted taking Xanax. Let me know in the comments below if you agree with this list or whether there's some reasons that I missed. I'd love to hear about it. And if you're interested in coming off benzos like Xanax, there is a safe way to do this so you get off without uncomfortable withdrawal. And if you want to learn how, check out this video next.